Mr. Chris Frostad, how are you, sir?
I'm great, Matt. Thanks. Yourself?
Glad. Not bad, not bad. And we've got a straggler on board,
Yeah.
Scott, with a very similar name to
Hi.
yours. So what's going on, Scott? Who are you?
I'm Chris's brother. I'm
Okay, nepotism lives long
Mom
and
said I had to
well.
bring him. Yeah.
Bring your brother to school
I'm,
day.
I'm the
Well
VP
done.
of exploration for Purepoint.
Okay,
Uh, I've been doing this for quite a few years. We started Purepoint 2006. Uh, Prior to that, I was a gold exploration geologist for 10 years. I've got a master's in environmental mining engineering. I did environmental work for 10 years at a handful of mine sites, one being the McLean Lake uranium mine in northern Saskatchewan. I was also the environmental specialist for Orano, and I was involved with the reclamation of the Cluff Lake mine, also in northern Saskatchewan.
right. Okay, some names we've all heard of dropped in there at the end, and you'll be the voice of reason and intelligence, bringing something to
Right.
something this show has never had before. So you're very welcome. Uh, we're going to talk today about, I guess, drilling in the Athabasca. You like to say you mentioned some of your history there, but I had some questions for Chris last time, and we kind of ran out of time after sort of well over an hour talking on other topics. But I'm going to start with the easy one, and Chris, I'll probably sort of direct it at you. And I think, as and many think, Scott might be the best guy for the job. If you can sort of direct them to him, okay? So first of all, I've got to ask the question: whatever would possess you to go and pick up an asset in the Athabasca Basin, especially when it seems to have been drilled by many before you?
Well, when we started this, it hadn't been, right? A lot of the property that we're working even today, Scott identified back in 2004. And at that point in time, there was a lot of opportunity out there, but there was a lot of there was a fair amount of history as well we were leaning on, but there hadn't been a lot of exploration done there for 10, 20, 30 years right across the basin. But as to why one would be attractive over the other, or why one would be attractive today, because certainly since then, there's been a boatload of exploration done right across that basin.
Yeah.
But I don't know, I should let Scott, because Scott's looking at these properties all the time to see if there's anything worth picking up.
Yeah, our first couple big assets were staking Red Willow. We didn't have a lot of competition when we went to stake that because it was outside the basin. Nobody had ever found a uranium deposit outside the basin, so no one was interested. But it was right on mine strike and not that far from operating mines. So we picked that up, and other interest. Other companies were looking to option properties. Nobody seemed to be interested in Red Willow because of its location. Now it's in prime territory. It's just outside the basin, and it's right on mine strike. So that was our first asset, and the other one was Turner Lake, and that was owned and operated by Orano for a long time. And when that came open, everybody wanted to stake it. Back in those days, you didn't stake claims online. You did it with a helicopter and people with machetes and tags. And they would run around and stake the claims. And at the time, we had the best claim stakers, and we got what we were looking for. So that was a valuable piece of property at the time that we were able to pick up by having the correct stakers.
Do you think that can happen today in the Athabasca? There's a lot of companies that play there.
Well, now that you stake online, the competition is very hard because anybody with a computer can stake. You don't have to pay. There's no initial investment. We used to have to pay 30 grand for helicopters or float planes and hire all these people, get everybody up north, and your chances of actually getting what you wanted to stake were slim because the majors were out there. They had the helicopters and people. Sometimes there was one claim we staked. The competitor had rented all the helicopters in Saskatchewan, so nobody else could stake. We went in the night before and slept in pup tents and beat them. But that doesn't happen today. In fact, there's people with bots that are staking ground, which we're going to try to put a kibosh on through the Saskatchewan Mining Association. But
would you say bots? Like as in
it's a computer program that
right
is. I just had a discussion about this. It takes a normal person about 9-10 seconds to get online and stake, but a bot, if you have it running from a computer that's close to Regina, which is where the server is, and if you're hardwired in rather than doing it through your internet, Wi-Fi, you can get it down to about 3-4 seconds and beat everybody. So we're trying to put a hold on that. There's a couple companies that do it.
Right. Okay. We maybe that's one for another day. So, like, the purpose of today's conversation and session is really to talk about the ins and outs of exploration, whether we're talking sort of exploration strategy, the drilling, execution, and results, etc. We're going to get into kind of structural and geological context. We're going to talk about drilling economics, i.e., working out whether the project's viable or not. Where we are today, what the future holds, and how companies take advantage of the kind of moves in the market place. And as you say, it's kind of competitive landscape. And not forgetting, in all of this, it's mining. It's going to be difficult, so we're going to look at some kind of risk assessment as well. So there's a lot to cover today. And you guys have come armed with, not that I've seen them, but I'm told you come armed with some charts and diagrams and some examples. This isn't a conversation about Purepoint. This is a conversation about all exploration companies and ways that you can look at the landscape in front of you. Okay, so without further ado, should we start with the exploration strategy and targeting? So, I think the first thing we look at is geological rationale. So break that down for us, Scott. What are you looking for when you look at it?
When we first go out, it's you stake what you can. A lot of times it's you haven't got a choice as to where your properties are. We did a bit back 20 years ago when we were initially staking. But once you've got your property, you've got to go back to the history. And in Canada, any work that you do, you have to file with the government. And back when we started, a lot of that stuff was on paper. And if you wanted to review the historic work, they would go get a shopping cart and come out with all these reports and maps and everything else that you had to go through to figure out what had been done before you do something next. And the government doesn't want you to repeat something that's already been done. So if there's been geophysics, certain types over it, you're supposed to use the historic data, not recreate it. So as far as the geophysics goes, that's your first point. It gives you an overall view of what your property geology is interpreted to hold. And there's nothing better than historic drill holes. That's real data.
And I think that's a point that's been made before too. Is that the geophysics alone doesn't really tell you anything until you poke a hole through it. Until you actually drill into it, your geophysics are an indication of what may or may not be down there. It's just interpreted, and that's why the historic drilling can be very important as well.
Yeah, and then once you look at the drill holes that are existing and understand what's there, then you relate that back to the geophysics that's been collected, and how does that fit with the geology? And based on what you're seeing, can I extend the geology in using the geophysics to areas of the property that haven't been drilled and that look prospective?
So you're taking some of this geophysical data and trying to understand what sort of features they have, and maybe how that can help you identify future targets. Right. And I think it'd be great during this conversation to kind of slightly demystify, because we'll be in danger of getting a little bit technical, and just point to the kind of so what components. So, we look for those kind of features so that we can more efficiently target our drill targets into the future. If we can bring that into the conversation, which would be good. So again, sticking with the geological rationale, what sort of specific indicators are you actually looking for in all of this to help you identify which areas are mineralized and which ones are not?
The most important data to start with is your magnetics. The magnetics will tell you the different, it'll respond to the different rock types in the basement. So we have sandstone sitting over top of a lot of this rock. Sandstone is magnetically invisible. It doesn't show up. So when you see a plan map of airborne magnetics, you're looking at the basement. The sandstone doesn't exist in that data, basically. And any large masses of magnetic high response, those are usually the areas that you avoid. So it's a.
I'm gonna pull up a magnetic map here if you want.
Yeah.
But it's a good start, because you might be able to eliminate 50% of the project immediately as not being prospective.
Right. So what are we looking at here, Chris? What's this?
Well, the background of this is our magnetics, and to Scott's point, your pinkish areas there are your magnetic highs, and the blues are your lows. So it's really telling you the density of the rock for a large part. Scott, you want to expand on that?
It's the magnetics. So the red indicator here is something that you would not test. It's not.
It's most likely granite.
It's likely granite or some kind of intrusive. But the edges of that mag high and the magnetic lows, the blues, those are that's softer rock. Usually it's sedimentary rock, old sedimentary rock. And if there's been any movement, and of course there has been, of the basement rock, it's going to move where the magnetic lows are, because that's the soft rock and that's the easiest stuff to buckle when you start pushing. And that creates a structure that creates an opening for hydrothermal fluids to flow along that carry uranium. The fluids will carry uranium as long as there's oxygen in the water. If it hits a rock type that takes oxygen out of the water, like graphite, then you'll get precipitation of uranium. We're looking here at, there's 3 conductors. Those conductors are conductor rock, and typically it's graphite. We're pretty sure in this case that is graphite. So that would be 3 shears of extreme movement along graphite, which can take oxygen out of the water. So that's a target. For sure.
This is an area that we haven't drilled, and but it's one we want to drill. So again, what you're seeing here is I don't know if you can see my cursor there, but you're seeing that softer rock running up and down against the edge of the harder rock. We've got our graphite in terms of these conductors. These lines that are drawn across the dotted lines, those are interpreted faults. And you get that really by almost standing back and squinting at the page and seeing where you think there's a shift in the rock, in the underlying rock type, or things that line up. And it's so you see these bends in the conductors and things. That's the movement we're looking to. So it's this combination of elements: the soft rock, the graphite, the structure. All of these things are coming together to say this is a good place to test. But again, to my first point, you don't know till you poke a hole in it.
Well, you don't know, and look, and we'll come on to that in a second. But this is a phase of work. I think probably the only thing worse than this would be people talking about doing surface sampling and trenching, right? Where people go, Yawn. I don't understand it. I don't get it. Drilling's the only thing I understand, right? That you get that a lot from retail investors, and I'm trying to think. The point of today is really to say, talk through stuff like this and go, look, this is why it is important. So what you're saying here is we've identified where we're most likely to be successful with our drilling. So drill targeting. This kind of color by numbers. Do you have a thing like painting by numbers, color by numbers? Do you have that in Canada?
Sure.
Yeah, right.
Can I show you my latest here? Yeah.
Please do some of your etchings, Chris. This space actually makes it a little bit easier for everyone to identify where they should be drilling. But it doesn't matter until you start drilling, though, right?
It's very difficult for us from an investor standpoint or from a communication standpoint, because for all of this work, and you're probably looking at hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of work, if not more than $1 million worth of work, none of which poked a hole through a deposit, which is really the inflection point for investors. And to a large degree, that's all they want to hear about. And until then, it's just very difficult because you're lining up and lining up. And the last thing you want to do is drill, because that's the most expensive thing to do. And you're looking at a line here. How long is that conductor, Scott?
2 kilometers.
2 kilometers, right? So you could fit 10 deposits in there. So the first thing we're doing is drilling 4, spaced well out, so that we can, again, start to understand what is really down there and then reconcile it or correlate it back to the pictures we're looking at here in order to go back and maybe do more.
Right. Okay. And we'll come to that, promise. Let's just kind of finish off on the stuff which people don't credit so we can understand it. So we're talking about magnetic surveys or electromagnetic surveys, as they're also called. Things like gravity surveys. I mean, what is that? What does that do for you? How does it improve your ability to target?
Here's a gravity map. This is over our Hook Lake project, which is on strike with NextGen's Arrow deposit, which is on this map. And you can also see Fission's Triple R deposit. The black lines are where electromagnetics have found conductive rock. And these are the areas that we think major movement has happened and are targets. You can see this project is peppered with these things. So there's lots of targets yet to go. But we've concentrated on the main one. We hit Spitfire. We drilled off that, and we've proceeded up to the north, and now we're over where that lightning zone is.
But in terms of what the gravity itself is telling us, and again, we only know what it's telling us because we had to do some drilling, and we can now interpret what all of this means. But it's the different colors we now recognize as different rock types. Is that right, Scott?
Yep, that's right. The denser rock is the pink. The rock with the lowest density is the blue off to the west, and that swath of blue over there is the Clearwater intrusives that have got a lower gravitational response, but it's quite a distinct rock unit. And then in where we've been finding the uranium, as you can see, they're kind of occurring at the edges of the dense rock, of the pink. You don't find anything in it. You find it at the edges. Like Arrow and Triple R, if you look, it's right at that edge of the pink. Same with the lightning zone.
But it's a completely different. It's a completely different map than if I showed you the magnetic map for this area, because it's telling us different things. This is more telling us, now we know it's telling us about rock type.
Yeah,
right. Okay.
So it narrows down the areas that you would call not prospective, but it's more about a priority thing. It's our priority target would be right on the edge of something that's hit a bit of uranium, like lightning. So
okay, and let's just, in terms of getting through all the terminology. So when you guys talk about soil sampling and trenching. Why do you do that? Finding rocks on surface surely it's got no bearing on what lies underneath.
It does. The soil sampling is it is a cheap survey, and it gives you questionable results. But the idea being that, and they've shown it, that there's some kind of gases or something coming up that get into the soil, and they're bringing up, if there's an ore deposit down there, it'll bring up some of those metals and make them anomalous in the soil. We don't do soil sampling here. The reason being, there is a bunch of sandstone sitting over top of the rock that we're actually targeting. So if you were to go out and trench or soil sampling, you're just sampling the sand. It doesn't work in this area.
Doesn't help you. Doesn't help you.
But just outside the basin, it sure does. Triple R, for example, that's outside of the basin, and they found it by radioactive boulders sitting on the ground. There won't be radioactive boulders within the Athabasca where the Spitfire and Lightning zone.
Right. Okay. So we're starting to build up layers of data which help with the targeting of where you're going to be spending the money. And as I think Christy said earlier, the expensive bit is the drilling. The drill execution methodology is important here. You've got to try to be efficient. So let's look at that. I mean, so how do you approach this phase, Scott? I mean, what do you start doing before you actually get the drills in place? What's important?
The importance that if you drill a hole, you want to hit your target. And to do that, the more geophysics you have, the better off you are. Because then you're testing a couple things. Like Spitfire, it's at the edge of a gravity high. And we also know from the magnetics, it was in a magnetic low. We did ground geophysics over it, where you use a generator and an electrode, you stick into the ground, you put electricity into the ground, and then using a receiver, you figure out exactly where the electricity is going, and it's zipping along these black lines of graphite. And then you get an exact location of it while you're standing over top of it. These are survey lines that have got these points on it. So we had somebody with a generator and putting metal spikes into the ground and sending down electricity. And we came up with a very specific point to target. We knew before we cut this grid and we did all this work, we knew there was conductors out there from our electromagnetics, which is VTEM. We also flew ZTEM out here, which is ways to measure electricity in the ground from the air prior to getting on the ground to find out exactly where it is. But so you don't want to miss. If you're
we thought there was one conductor here from the airborne work.
That's right.
And when we did the groundwork, realized there was three of different strengths.
And these three they're 100 meters apart. So you can miss. And with the cost of a hole, you don't want to. So it's worth doing everything you can possibly before you get in and start drilling holes.
Right. Well, actually, that brings it nicely on to the next question, which is around kind of around efficiency, right? As a small junior explorer, where money's expensive and money's tight, you gotta get that balance between trying to do the right things geologically. As geologists, you guys get super excited about lots of stuff, which perhaps the market doesn't, right? So, the market wants you to make discoveries. You probably want to spend a bit more time understanding the geology. So how do you kind of prioritize your activity and your allocation of capital?
Well, to give an honest answer, I worked when I was in gold, I was working for major companies, and it's slow, methodical exploration. You don't drill a hole until you can justify you need to drill that hole. And we've always kind of worked on the mantra that if we act like a major, maybe someone will treat us like a major. And that's how our exploration was done. It is systematic. You can't let someone push you ahead of what you're prepared to do. You don't want to be wasting money drilling a bad hole. didn't give you any information. The information from your drill holes is vital. So even if you don't hit something, it's, to me, with the first hole, I learned so much is to go back and relook at the geophysics and interpret that drill hole, that I get a big understanding of the area around it, and the second hole will be a lot better. But you gotta have all the information synthesized before you start.
But the other aspect of this that I know Scott's always been cognizant of is you don't want to kill a project. If I drill 2 dead holes and the world thinks that that's the end of a major project, you've killed it in the eyes of the market. So you also have to be planning out these drill programs in a way that you're going to find at least something of interest that would prompt you to go back and do it again. Because it would be too easy to put out results that just leave the market thinking there's nothing there and they'd walk away. When in fact, as Scott's pointing out, every hole you're learning so much that it's probably the exact opposite.
But yeah, like there's you're learning so much because no data's bad. Data is great when you're a geologist, but if you're a retail guy saying, well, this company's going to keep needing to raise money and dilute me, I want you to kind of find the best possible result and prioritize things in a way which allows you to do that, buys you some time, buys you some growth in appreciation in the share price. Do you know what I mean? So I think that getting that balance as a junior is really, really important. It's not the most efficient way, but it's the right way financially.
But the other thing too is time flies. And if I was to go out and tell the world that I am sure there's a deposit here, my story's dead in about 8 months. Now what am I going to tell them? And that's the problem with going the other direction, which is over promoting, over drilling, doing miles and miles of drilling and coming up with nothing. I don't want that to be the swan song. I don't want this to be the last. So it is a real balance, and it's a balance of not getting too far out over your skis, but always having to communicate and demonstrate that that there is more to be done here, and that you haven't lost the opportunity for there to be something big there.
Right. Well, I guess it comes back to my earlier conversation of it's down to you guys to describe the so what. So what is this? We've done this. We haven't made a discovery, but what we have is data. So what that allows us to do is X, Y, and Z. Do you know what I mean? Because there's nothing worse than companies talking about we've had technical success. We've like, what does that mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
I don't know.
It means something to me. But
right, great. So explain it to me.
Well, a technical success is if you explain your geophysics with a single drill hole to the point that I think I understand this geology now, and I didn't before. I didn't know anything about the geology. I've just been staring at colors on a map because it's geophysics. It's that leap forward in your knowledge. This I've got to point out this conductor that we're drilling over 2 kilometers long. As Chris pointed out, you could fit a handful of arrows in there, like deposits. It's been drilled. That the conductor's been known for a long time. It was drilled back in the 80s, and you can see there's one hole, and it's in a pretty good place, but it's a vertical hole. And at the time, the understanding there was no such thing as an arrow deposit in the basement. If it wasn't at the unconformity where that sandstone hits the basement rock, you weren't going to find anything. It was just the model of the geology of how to find these deposits was wrong. You've also got to look in the basement. This was a vertical hole that you can see. It didn't, drilling vertically down, you weren't going to hit that conductor, and they didn't. And as soon as they touched the unconformity, there was no uranium there, so they stopped the drill. So they didn't learn anything about the basement geology. Like I learned nothing from that hole looking at it, but it looks like the conductor's been tested, but it's not. I'm drilling very close to that.
Okay, well let's talk. Because these are important questions to ask. Let's talk about drill hole planning. Okay, so how do you go about doing that? What does that look like?
Well, in this case, you can see that there's a red line, and that's it's at the front conductor there. off to the right, but just half of it. The upper part of it, you can see where there's 5 red dots that are connected by red lines. And that's nowhere else. Those red dots mean that we got a stronger EM response there than we did anywhere else. And that may mean because the graphitic package is thicker in that area. And if it's thicker, maybe that means that there was more pull and push and a bigger opening for hydrothermal fluids. And so maybe that's where we should start. And then I'll drill a hole through that, but I'll drill it at an angle so I can also test the other 2 and see what all 3 of them look like. And then try to interpret that into a geology map and then start stepping out.
Okay, okay, let's talk about drilling. So, are we using diamond, RC, RAB? How do you kind of mix that up?
We're using diamond drilling. We've had a lot of difficulties out in this area with the sandstone, especially at Hook Lake. We've had a lot of problems. We're hoping just to core all the way through the sandstone and then into the basement rock. But we've had issues where we've had to use a tricone, which just grinds up the rock. So as a geologist, it's horrible because you don't get anything except dust coming out of your hole. But it keeps the hole straight. And if you hit a boulder or if you hit sandstone that has lost its matrix and it's just unconsulted sand, that'll plug up your drill hole or plug up your drill rods and make them stuck in the ground, and then you lose the hole. So you've got to change the way that you're drilling depending on the conditions. You may change the drill bit, you may change your drill muds, you may change the speed at which you're drilling. There are things you can do at the drill to make sure you get down.
Right. Okay. And what are the things that you do to define? You referenced it earlier in terms of the drill spacing. I guess the kind of the grid strategy. If you're doing the systematic approach of yours, how do you work out how to plan that?
Depends on my budget. Depends on how prospective I think a certain area is. But usually, first pass along a conductor is about every 400 to 800 meters. So big step outs, just so you can see the basement, see what's causing the conductor. Like, it's not necessarily graphite sometimes. It can be a contact between 2 different rock types. And there's no movement, but there's a bit of conductive rock in between along that contact. So going in and explaining your conductors over with big step outs is a good way to go. But if you hit something, you don't want to screw it up. You want to do a small step out. You want to drill above it. You want to drill below it. You want to drill to the left. You want to drill to the right. And out of those 4 holes, which one is getting better from your initial hit that prompted you to drill the next 4? And then based on those 5 holes, you try to figure out which way it's improving. And then you can do bigger step outs or smaller step outs, depending on what you're seeing.
Okay. And what are the sort of biggest technical challenges you come up against with regards to the drilling?
With the drilling?
Yeah.
Trying to keep a hole straight. If I'm trying to step out 30 meters and I've got to drill through 100 meters of overburden with granitic boulders in it, and then I'm into sandstone that has been altered so that it's not stone anymore, it's just loose sand. And then you get down to the basement rock, and if you hit a fault, it'll catch your rods and it'll start bending it. So if I'm trying to step out 30 meters and my target is about 350, 400 meters down, yeah, it's a real issue. So there's things you can do with the drill, but that's your biggest challenge, is to keep a straight hole through all of that.
Especially with uranium, how does water affect things? People talk about water in the Athabasca Basin.
I haven't had a big problem with the water, except we had a special condition when we were drilling the Spitfire showing. It was the fact that the sandstone, there was a couple pressurized seams of water. and no drilling company could get through it. It was the fifth drilling company, believe it or not, that finally figured out how to get through this water because it was pressurized. As soon as they hit it, all this sand would all of a sudden start flowing up the pipe and coming up at the drill, and then the rods would be sanded in, is the term, because you've got sand inside your pipe and outside your pipe, and you're trying to twist it, pushing it down, and it locks in, and then it locks into a point that you can't get it out. And then you start putting cutters down, trying to cut off the pipe to retrieve all this metal that you've got stuck in the hole, which is very expensive. So that was our big challenge at Spitfire. And the way to get through it was, once we knew what depth we were about to hit it, just before we hit it, everybody was ready. We'd hit it, the sand would start coming up, and they would just start pulling all the pipe out. They would let the hole fill up with sand, and then they would re-drill it. And every time they re-drilled it and they got down to that sand seam, sand would start coming up again, and they'd pull all the pipe. They'd do that 3-4 times, and eventually the pressure would come off. The sand wouldn't come up as high, and we could get through it without sanding.
Right. Okay.
But that's all. That took a lot of lost rods before we figured that out.
Right. Okay. And think, obviously, water and seasonality go hand in hand, so that you have drilling seasons and non-drilling seasons. How do you cope with that? Because, obviously, in different parts of the world, you can drill 24/7, 365. It's not like that where you are.
No, it's because there's so much swamp and wetlands up there, that winter is the easiest way to get around. If you're close enough to put in a trail and to drag your equipment out to the project. If your targets are remote, that's a lot of work to get a trail all the way into that target. So you'll want to go with a helicopter. And if you're going with a helicopter, you don't want to do it in the winter. The days are too short. You can't do a crew change. And moving a helicopter, using a helicopter to put together a drill and take it apart, it's with that blast coming down from the helicopter, it's pretty cold underneath. So there's a couple of considerations there as to the best time of year to do certain targets.
Okay. And I guess moving on to the bit which I quite like, which is really about how do you start interpreting some of this drilling. Like I say, we could go much, much deeper, but I think just superficially initially, it's nice to sort of hit all of these talking points, right? So how do you know what makes a good drill result? I'm going to spend more money here. What does that look like?
Well, usually uranium helps. That's
I got that bit. But coming back to that point about technical success or not, right?
Yeah. See, I did 10 years of gold, and you don't know if you've got something until you send it away, and you get an assay back. You may think it looks good. Well, that's a good looking quartz vein, or that's a good looking sericitic shear zone. But it may come back with nothing, or it may come back loaded. You don't know until you get the assay. With uranium, you know immediately. You got a hand scintillometer, and it starts screaming over your core as soon as you pull it out of the ground. So that's a good indicator to follow something up.
Well, hang on, because again, talking to some explorers, they say, man, we're slightly delayed because the assays are taking 6, 8, 12 weeks, sometimes 4 months, I'm hearing. Is that them just spinning me a yarn? Shouldn't they all have a scintillometer and go, yep, we're in the money here, boys, let's keep going?
Yeah,
or do you need to systematically work out how you allocate your capital?
No, we saw almost a decade of that with our neighbors reporting counts per second from a handheld scintillometer when they drilled something, and then they were waiting for the assays. And a lot of they'd say we've got 15 meters of off scale. It's over 500 counts per second on their scintillometer, but their scintillometer goes up to 1,000. It's there was that kind of odd stuff going on, and that's a hand scintillometer. It's the counts per second depends on how close you hold it to the core. And it also depends on the make of the scintillometer, as to counts per second. You gotta know what model you're using to make that mean anything. And even then, it's just an indicator.
Right.
But if you take a downhole triple gamma probe, which is quite expensive, rather than just a single gamma probe, which we usually use, if we're drilling off major mineralization, we bought one of these instruments. It's triple gamma, and it can tell you the difference between potassium and thorium and uranium. And because it's going down the hole, it's completely surrounded by the rock. So it's none of this with the scintillometer. It's you get a consistent reading every time.
Okay.
And you can take the number from a triple gamma probe and come up with an EU 308.
Okay, so are we saying it's reasonable for companies to say, like, the assays are taking a long time to turn around, I can't rely on my scintillometer, but we think it's good. However, until we know for sure, we're not going to go spend money on drilling. Is that a reasonable thing for to be told?
Well, no, they know whether they want to drill or not. It's as a PGO putting out an EU 308, you could get burned. Because there could be, it wasn't properly picking up the thorium, or my background data that I'm using to convert this gamma into an EU 308, I'm a little bit off. I haven't got enough data yet from this area to give a good number. There's reasons not to do it, but the geologist knows, is what I'm telling you. It's I know what a hole hits after I've drilled it.
And we've put that out. We've put out EU 308.
I have put out EU 308s. Yeah. You can't put out the right number, but you can put out but the geologist knows well enough what's been hit.
Right. But they can't say anything. That's the trouble.
But yes.
Regulated environment.
In most cases, they can't say anything because they could be wrong.
So as a retail investor, I'm still struggling to work out what I believe, don't believe. What should I read into?
I only started using EU 308s after I had enough data drilled in Spitfire that I was getting repeatable. That if I say this, yes, using my past examples, but it's that changes from spot to spot. I can't come up with an EU 308 the first time I hit something, because geology is going to be different, and I'm going to get a slightly different number.
Right. Okay. Well, actually, let's stick with kind of like core recoverability and quality. So, how do you ensure that you're getting with your diamond drilling, you're getting good quality core? You've talked about some of the problems that maybe, but how do you ensure that the integrity of the core is good?
There's things you can do at the drill, and if there's any issues with the quality of the core in the core shack, you've got to let the drilling company know, and you've got to start discussing options to make it better. And sometimes that could be the drillers are drilling a little too fast in a zone that has got rock that's exceptionally soft because it's been cooked by hot water. And we can go tell the drilling company, once you get down to 150, we want you to not be drilling more than 30 meters a shift. Take it slow and until you get down to this depth, and then you can speed back up again. So that would improve recovery, and then it's easier to log. It's easier to tell why the uranium is there, and then you can cut your core in half, send half to the lab, and still have a meaningful piece left behind to interpret. That's one example.
Right. Okay. And so just sticking with the kind of core thing, I mean, how do you understand in terms of like significant intersections, how do you determine whether a section is significant? What are the measures by which you look at it?
Well, I can use what the government calls significant. If I hit 0.1% U308 over 10 meters, I have to cement that to make it to isolate it environmentally. So I'll push a rubber plug using the drill down to the bottom of the intercept, that 10 meter intercept, and fill it up with 10 meters of concrete. And then no water is going to be flowing through our hole into that zone and spreading uranium or contaminated water around. So there's an opening number, 0.1% over 10 meters.
Right.
Which is the equivalent of 1 meter of 1%.
Okay. So, and what do you think in today's market people are looking for? Because we see the occasionally super high grade headlines that come out every now and again, and certainly in Athabasca. Is there sort of a profile that you look for? You say, well, I think this will do. This is, a grade range which I would consider as a discovery, economic discovery at that.
Well, I guess my example would be what's background? How much uranium is just typically in the rock? And it's usually somewhere between 10 and 50 parts per million. Like it's just there naturally. So if I hit 500 parts per million uranium over an intercept, is that significant? You can't mine that. But as I've repeated to Chris, the VP of exploration at Orano had one of the geologists ask him if it was significant or not, 500 parts per million. And he said, well, considering the fact that most of our holes don't hit anything, of course it's significant. It's something to follow up. You drill to the left, you drill to the right, you drill above, you drill below. And if it's still 500 or it's nothing, you move on. Or if you hit 2,000, then go that way. It's
and you get. So Chris is. I was speaking to Chris over the years, and he talks about holes which were drilled a long time ago and just left, and we're going to move on. We're going to come back to that later. We're going to move on to the next thing, and so on. So this, Chris, probably one for you because you're the guy that said it to me. He said, why leave something if you think it's good? Why say, we'll come back to that later? What's the kind of rationale for that, the allocation of those dollars?
Well, so what I'm pulling up here, this is a program that went on back in the mid 70s by Orano on what turned out to be the McLean pods. There's a number of pods out in that area. These three lines, what you're looking at here, are the geophysical lines that they ran at that time, electromagnetics. And from that, they determined that there was a graphitic conductor or some sort of an electromagnetic anomaly that would have run across it, such as like this. So that gave us the target that they would want to go in and drill. They drilled hole number 2, and they hit 0.134% U3O8 over 6.5 meters, 15,000 counts per second. That's a good hole. You need to follow something like that up. So they planned and plotted out 6 more holes. They did 15-meter step-outs, left, right, north, south. And then they also proposed drill holes out on the other lines of geophysics that they'd run. They then started drilling those holes. Hole 9 came in with only 0.03% over a couple of meters. When they drilled out on the lines, they got 5 ppm, not much going on out there. So then they drilled to the north of their big hole, and they only got 0.09%, or 690 counts per second over 0.3 meters. And this is when they moved on. They abandoned this particular area and went drilling elsewhere. 10 years later, they came back to this area when they were looking for things to follow up on, and they drilled hole 53. And there they found 7.5% over 10 meters, much to everybody's shock and awe. The interesting aspect of this is when they then went back in and finished drilling this off, this is what the actual pod looked like. So what you can see here is had they drilled the other 2 proposed holes, they would have hit the high grade areas there. But this thing just happened to fit neatly between the lines that they were running. So you never know. That's kind of the game. The game here is that it's a precision game. And if you find anything of interest, you have to follow it up properly. And Scott, what's following something up properly?
4 holes
I'm
around
like,
an intercept.
yeah, and well, this is the trouble with this space. It's really frustrating because it's like you never know. Seems the answer to a lot of questions, and that's what we all keeps us awake at night.
Which is
and
why
also
you want to
makes
move
us
carefully.
excited.
You want to move carefully with as much
Yeah.
data as humanly possible.
Right. Okay. On that bombshell, folks, we're gonna. There's part one done. Part two is coming up, and I think in part two, what we're going to talk about is a little bit more around. And I think this is the exciting bit, is the kind of the money shot, as it were. It's the drilling economics and project viability, future steps and plans, expansion plans, etc. And then kind of some trying to understand the kind of regional and competitive landscape, and then we'll kind of talk about some risks and challenges, and we might even go back a little bit in terms of some of the structural geological context as a reminder at the beginning of the next session. But a lot of data. We'll try and really dumb this down and in terms of the written content, but I hope it's kind of giving people listening to this some insight in terms of the type of thinking. It's not easy. You really do need as much data as possible to try and make intelligent decisions, and even then, you're the hands of the rock gods as to what you're going to find down there. Is that fair enough? Should we come back and finish this off?
No, absolutely. Yeah.
Perfect. Okay, good. Any words of wisdom, Chris?
Oh, none that I haven't given before.
Really?
It's quite a game out here. It's but it's high risk, high reward, and it really comes down to spending your money properly. As Scott says, act like a major. Our two big projects, as I've said before, we've been paced by our projects or by our partners. They make us go at a pace that we may not have stuck to otherwise. It's a lot of money. It's a lot of money we spend out there, and it's spending it wisely and not wasting it for promotional purposes where you can avoid it for sure.
Okay. Scott, lovely to meet you. We'll see you again for round two.
Yeah, okay. Sounds good.